The champagne glass slipped from my fingers, shattering against the marble floor of the Riverside Country Club as I watched my husband Connor walk through the entrance with his arm wrapped around a woman who definitely wasn't invited to my 35th birthday celebration. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Brianna Hayes, his 29-year-old colleague from Sterling & Associates Marketing, stood there in a stunning red dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, smiling at my guests like she belonged there. The worst part wasn't just seeing them together at my own party. It was the way Connor looked completely comfortable, as if bringing his mistress to his wife's birthday was the most natural thing in the world. The evening had started perfectly. I had spent weeks planning every detail of this celebration, from the elegant floral arrangements to the custom menu featuring all my favorite dishes. The guest list included our closest friends, my colleagues from Thompson Creative Studios, and several neighbors from Westbrook Heights. My best friend Nicole Rodriguez had driven 3 hours from the city to be there, and even my elderly neighbor Maggie Sinclair had dressed up for the occasion despite her recent health struggles. Everyone was gathered in the private dining room I had reserved, laughing and enjoying themselves under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers. I had been standing near the entrance, greeting late arrivals and basking in the warmth of being surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me. The party planner Diana Foster had outdone herself with the decorations, transforming the space into something that felt both elegant and intimate. Connor had given a beautiful toast earlier, speaking about our 8 years of marriage and how much he cherished our life together in Cedar Falls. His words had moved several guests to tears, and I remembered feeling so grateful for the man I had chosen to spend my life with. That gratitude evaporated the moment I saw them walk in together. Connor spotted me immediately, and for just a split second, I saw something flicker across his face. Surprise? Guilt? It was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. He straightened his shoulders and approached me with Brianna still attached to his arm like an expensive accessory. The conversations around us began to die down as other guests noticed the newcomers. I could feel Nicole's sharp intake of breath from somewhere behind me, and saw Maggie Sinclair's eyebrows raise with the kind of disapproval that only a woman of her generation could convey. "Rachel, honey," Connor said, his voice carrying that smooth confidence he used in client presentation. "I hope you don't mind, but Brianna was feeling under the weather earlier and almost didn't make it. I offered her a ride since she didn't want to miss your special day." The lie rolled off his tongue so effortlessly that I almost admired his skill. Brianna stepped forward with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, extending a perfectly manicured hand toward me. Her nails were painted the exact same shade of red as her dress, and I noticed she wore a delicate bracelet that looked suspiciously like one I had admired in a jewelry store downtown just last month. "Happy birthday, Rachel," she said, her voice sweet as honey with just a hint of something I couldn't quite identify. Smugness, perhaps. "Thank you so much for including me. Connor talks about you constantly at the office." The words hit me like individual slaps, including I had done no such thing. In fact, I had specifically not invited anyone from Connor's office except his assistant, who had declined due to a family commitment. The guest list for this party had been carefully curated, limited to people who were important parts of our personal life, not professional acquaintances. Yet here stood Brianna Hayes, acting as though her presence was not only expected but welcome. I forced a smile that felt like it might crack my face. "How thoughtful of Connor to give you a ride. I hope you're feeling better now." The words tasted bitter in my mouth, but years of hosting client dinners for my graphic design business had taught me how to maintain composure even when everything inside me was screaming. "Oh, much better, thank you," Brianna replied, her hand moving to rest briefly on Connor's chest in a gesture that was far too intimate for a colleague comforting another colleague. "You know how Connor is, always taking care of everyone." I did know how Connor was, or at least I thought I did. The man I had married was considerate and thoughtful, the type of person who remembered anniversaries and brought me coffee in bed on Sunday mornings. He was successful in his career, but never let work consume his personal life. He was charming at social gatherings, but always made sure I felt included and valued. The Connor I knew would never have brought an uninvited guest to my birthday party without discussing it with me first, especially not a female colleague I barely knew. Yet here he stood, his hand resting possessively on the small of Brianna's back as if it belonged there. The gesture was subtle enough that our guests might not notice, but intimate enough that I felt like I was watching my marriage dissolve in real time. My mind raced through the past few months, searching for signs I might have missed. Connor had been working later hours recently, claiming that Sterling & Associates was pursuing several major new accounts that required his personal attention. There had been more business dinners, more weekend calls that he took in his home office with the door closed, more text messages that made him smile in ways that had nothing to do with me. Nicole appeared at my elbow, her presence both comforting and grounding. She had always been perceptive about people, able to read situations that others might miss. Her dark eyes swept over Connor and Brianna with the analytical precision of someone who worked in forensic accounting. I could practically see her mental calculator adding up details that didn't quite make sense. "Rachel, you look stunning tonight," Nicole said, her voice warm but her gaze sharp as she studied our unexpected guests. "I love what you've done with your hair, very sophisticated." I had spent the afternoon at the salon, getting highlights and a professional blowout that made my usually straight brown hair fall in perfect waves around my shoulders. The royal blue dress I wore was new, purchased specifically for this occasion, and I had felt beautiful when I looked in the mirror before leaving the house. Now I felt overdressed for my own party, like I was trying too hard to compete with someone who effortlessly commanded attention simply by existing. "Thank you," I managed, touching my hair self-consciously. "Nicole, I'd like you to meet Brianna Hay. She works with Connor at Sterling & Associates." Nicole extended her hand with a smile that never wavered, though I caught the slight tightening around her eyes. "Pleasure to meet you, Brianna. I don't think Rachel mentioned you were coming tonight." "Last-minute addition," Connor interjected smoothly. "Brianna has been working closely with me on the Henderson account, and when she mentioned she didn't have plans tonight, I thought it would be nice for her to join us. Rachel's always so gracious about including new people." Another lie, delivered with the same confident ease as the first. The Henderson account had been Connor's baby for months, a potentially lucrative contract with a local restaurant chain that could significantly boost his commission. He had mentioned working late on presentations and strategy sessions, but never once had he mentioned collaborating closely with Brianna Hay. In fact, the few times her name had come up in our conversations, it was always in passing, as one of several junior associates who worked on various projects. I excused myself to check on the appetizers, needing a moment to process what was happening. In the ladies' room, I splashed cool water on my wrists and tried to calm my racing heart. The face looking back at me in the mirror seemed like a stranger's, all sharp angles and barely contained panic. I had planned this evening to be a celebration of another year of life, surrounded by people who loved and supported me. Instead, I felt like I was starring in my own personal nightmare. When I returned to the party, I found Connor and Brianna seated at one of the round tables, deep in conversation with Paul Garrett, Connor's boss. Paul was a man in his 50s who had always been friendly toward me, often praising Connor's work ethic and creativity. Seeing him animated in discussion with both Connor and Brianna made my stomach clench with a new realization. This wasn't some impulsive decision on Connor's part. If his boss was comfortable with Brianna's presence at a personal family event, it suggested that their working relationship was already well known within the company. I moved through the party like an actress playing a role, accepting birthday wishes and making small talk while my mind churned with questions. How long had this been going on? Did our friends suspect anything? Was I the only person in the room who hadn't seen this coming? The elaborate birthday celebration that had felt so special an hour ago now seemed like an expensive joke, with me as the unwitting punchline. Maggie Sinclair approached me during a lull in conversation, her sharp blue eyes filled with concern. Despite being 67 and dealing with some health issues that had slowed her down recently, Maggie remained one of the most observant people I knew. She had lived in the house next door to us on Maple Ridge Drive for over 30 years, and had become something of a surrogate grandmother to me, since my own family lived several states away. "Dear, are you feeling all right?" she asked, her voice low enough that others couldn't overhear. "You look a bit pale." I glanced around to make sure Connor was occupied before answering. He was still at the table with Brianna and Paul, their heads bent together over what appeared to be Connor's phone, probably looking at work-related photos or documents. The sight made my chest tight with an emotion I wasn't ready to name. "Just a little overwhelmed," I admitted to Maggie. "It's been a long day of preparation." Maggie nodded, but her expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced by my explanation. "That young woman who came with Connor, she seems quite comfortable here." The observation was delivered in Maggie's typical understated way, but I caught the underlying message. Maggie had noticed the same things I had, the casual intimacy between Connor and Brianna, that went beyond professional collaboration. Coming from someone who had observed human nature for nearly 7 decades, the comment carried significant weight. "Yes, she does," I replied carefully. "They work together." Maggie murmured, her tone suggesting she had formed her own opinions about the nature of that working relationship. "Well, if you need anything, dear, you know where to find me." Sometimes it helps to have someone to talk to who's seen a few things in her time. The offer was made with the kind of gentle wisdom that comes from experience, and I felt a rush of gratitude for this woman who had become such an important part of my life. Maggie had moved to Westbrook Heights as a young bride, raised 3 children in her house on Maple Ridge Drive, and weathered her share of storms, including the death of her husband 15 years ago. If anyone could offer perspective on what I was experiencing, it would be her. As the evening progressed, I found myself studying Connor and Brianna with new eyes. The way she laughed at his jokes with genuine delight rather than polite courtesy. The way he anticipated her needs, refilling her wine glass before she had to ask and ensuring she was included in every conversation. The way they moved together through the room like dance partners who had been practicing their steps for months, rather than colleagues who barely knew each other outside of work. The final straw came during the cake-cutting ceremony. Diana Foster had arranged for a beautiful 3-layer cake decorated with fresh flowers and elegant script, wishing me happy birthday. As I stood behind the dessert table with the ornate silver knife in my hand, Connor moved to stand beside me for the traditional photograph. But instead of focusing on me and the ceremonial moment, I caught him glancing over at Brianna, who was standing with Nicole and some of my other friends. The look that passed between them lasted only a second, but it contained volume. It was the kind of private communication that happens between people who share secrets.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Who have inside jokes and intimate knowledge of each other's thoughts. It was the look of 2 people who were counting the minutes until they could be alone together again. It was not the look that should pass between a married man and his colleague while his wife cuts her birthday cake. I made it through the rest of the evening on autopilot, accepting congratulations and thanks from departing guests, while my mind raced through the implications of what I had witnessed. Connor and Brianna left together, with Connor offering another smooth explanation about giving her a safe ride home since she had been feeling unwell earlier. He kissed my cheek and promised to be home soon, just needed to make sure Brianna got home safely and maybe stop by the office to grab some files for Monday morning. The lies were becoming more elaborate, more detailed, which somehow made them feel more insulting than simple deception. Connor was not only betraying me but doing so while assuming I was too naive or too trusting to see through his fabrications. The man I had loved and trusted for 8 years was treating me like a fool, and the worst part was that until tonight, his assumption might have been correct. After the last guest departed, and Diana Foster finished cleaning up the remnants of my birthday celebration, I sat alone in my car in the parking lot of the Riverside Country Club. The silence felt deafening after hours of conversation and laughter. My beautiful new dress felt like a costume I was ready to take off, and my carefully styled hair was beginning to fall from its perfect arrangement. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the photos from the evening, images that Diana had already uploaded to a shared album for the guests. In picture after picture, I saw what I had missed while living through the moments in real time. Connor's hand on Brianna's back, Brianna's fingers briefly touching Connor's arm during conversation, the way they stood just slightly closer to each other than necessary, the way they looked at each other when they thought no one was watching. But perhaps most damning of all was how Connor looked in the photos with me compared to how he looked in the background shots that included Brianna. With me he wore the smile of someone fulfilling an obligation, pleasant but distant. In the candid shots where Brianna appeared in the frame, his expression was animated, engaged, alive in a way that made my heart ache with recognition. That was how he used to look at me during our early years together, before marriage and routine and the comfortable assumption of permanence had settled over our relationship like dust. The drive home to 2147 Maple Ridge Drive took only 15 minutes, but it felt like crossing into a different world. The house that had been our shared sanctuary for the past 5 years suddenly seemed like a stage set, pretty on the surface but hollow underneath. Connor's BMW was not in the driveway, which meant he was still playing out whatever fiction he had constructed about taking Brianna home and stopping by the office. I let myself into the quiet house and stood in the foyer, looking around at the life we had built together. Family photos lined the console table, documenting our progression from young couple to married partners to homeowners in an upscale suburban neighborhood. The pictures told the story of 2 people who had seemed genuinely happy, who had built something substantial together. But tonight had revealed cracks in that foundation that I could no longer ignore. The question now was what to do with the knowledge that my marriage might be a carefully maintained illusion, and whether there was any way to salvage something real from the wreckage of my shattered assumption. I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, each step feeling heavier than the last. Tomorrow I would have to decide whether to confront Connor directly or investigate further before making any accusation. Tonight I just needed to process the reality that my 35th birthday party had become the night I discovered my husband was in love with someone else. As I hung my beautiful blue dress in the closet next to Connor's work clothes, I caught sight of myself in the full-length mirror. The woman looking back at me seemed older than she had that morning, marked by the kind of knowledge that changes everything even when nothing has technically happened yet. I had entered the evening as a wife celebrating another year of life with the people she loved most. I was ending it as a woman who finally understood that love alone was not enough to keep someone who had already decided to leave. The house settled around me with the familiar creaks and sighs of a structure built to last, while upstairs a marriage quietly began to collapse under the weight of secrets that could no longer be hidden. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and difficult decisions, but tonight belonged to grief for the life I thought I had been living, and the future I had assumed we would share. The next morning arrived with the kind of bright September sunshine that mocked my emotional state. I had barely slept, spending most of the night staring at the ceiling while Connor's side of the bed remained empty. He had sent a text around midnight, claiming that after dropping Brianna off, he had indeed stopped by the office and gotten caught up in urgent work for Monday's presentation. The message was typical Connor, detailed enough to seem plausible but vague enough to avoid verification. I made coffee in our spacious kitchen, the morning routine feeling strange and performative without Connor's usual presence. He typically woke before me on weekends, brewing the first pot and reading news on his tablet while I gradually emerged from sleep. The silence felt different now, charged with unspoken tension rather than comfortable domestic. My phone buzzed with a text from Nicole, asking if I was feeling okay and suggesting we meet for brunch to discuss the party. Her message was carefully worded, but I understood the subtext. She had noticed the same troubling dynamics I had observed, and wanted to talk through what we had both witnessed. Before I could respond, I heard the familiar sound of Connor's BMW pulling into our drive. He entered through the garage door looking perfectly put together despite his supposed late night at the office. His hair was freshly styled, his weekend clothes crisp and coordinated, and he carried the leather portfolio he used for important client material. Everything about his appearance suggested someone who had taken time with his morning preparation, rather than someone who had worked until the early hours and grabbed a few hours of sleep. "Morning, beautiful," he said, crossing the kitchen to kiss my forehead with the same casual affection he had shown for years. "Sorry about last night. The Henderson presentation needed major revisions, and you know how Paul gets when we're close to landing a big account." I accepted the kiss while studying his face for any signs of deception. Connor had always been skilled at compartmentalizing, able to switch between work mode and home mode with remarkable ease, but this morning, something felt different. There was an energy about him that seemed almost euphoric, the kind of excitement that comes from new possibilities rather than professional achievements. "How's Brianna feeling today?" I asked, keeping my tone casual while I buttered a piece of toast. She seemed to recover quickly from whatever was bothering her earlier. Connor paused in the act of pouring himself coffee, and I caught a flicker of something across his features before his usual confident expression returned. "Oh, she's fine. Turns out she was just nervous about meeting everyone. You know how it is with work events, especially when you're newer to the company." The explanation felt rehearsed, as if Connor had anticipated this question and prepared his response in advance. Brianna Hayes had not struck me as someone who suffered from social anxiety. If anything, she had moved through my birthday party with the confidence of someone completely comfortable in any social situation. Her interactions with my guests had been smooth and natural, suggesting significant experience with networking and professional socializing. She seemed very comfortable last night, I observed, watching Connor's reaction carefully. "Very familiar with everyone, actually. Brianna's good at reading rooms," Connor replied, his tone suggesting this was a professional skill he admired. "It's one of the reasons Paul assigned her to work with me on the Henderson account. She has excellent instincts about client relations." I nodded as if this explanation satisfied my curiosity, while mentally noting how easily Connor deflected personal questions by redirecting to professional topics. The conversation felt like a chess match, where I was trying to gather information without revealing that I suspected anything beyond innocent work collaboration. After Connor left for what he claimed was a Saturday morning golf game with colleagues, I found myself standing at our front window watching Maggie Sinclair tend to her garden next door. She moved slowly but deliberately among her flower beds, deadheading roses and pulling weeds with the methodical patience of someone who understood that good gardens required consistent attention to small details. I had always admired Maggie's garden, which bloomed from early spring through late fall thanks to her careful planning and tireless maintenance. She had taught me about seasonal planting during my first year in the neighborhood, sharing both practical advice and philosophical observations about the parallels between gardening and life. Today, watching her work, I wondered if she might have insights about other kinds of cultivation that happened over time. Decision made, I crossed our adjoining driveways and approached the low fence that separated our properties. Maggie looked up from her roses with a smile that immediately shifted to concern when she saw my expression. "Rachel, dear, you look like you didn't sleep well. Still feeling overwhelmed from last night? Something like that, I admitted, glancing around to ensure Connor's car was truly gone before continuing. Maggie, could I ask you something? As someone who's observed a lot of relationships over the years, Maggie straightened slowly, brushing soil from her gardening gloves with careful attention. Of course, dear. Would you like to come sit on the porch? I was just out to take a break anyway. Her front porch was furnished with comfortable wicker chairs and offered a clear view of both our houses as well as most of Maple Ridge Drive. Settling into the chair beside her felt like entering a sanctuary where honest conversations were not only possible but encouraged. Maggie had always possessed the rare gift of being fully present when someone needed to talk, offering her complete attention without judgment or premature advice. Last night, when Connor brought Brianna to the party, I began carefully. You mentioned that she seemed comfortable there. I've been thinking about that observation. Maggie nodded slowly, her intelligent blue eyes encouraging me to continue. Sometimes as we get older, we start noticing patterns that younger people might miss. Not because we're wiser necessarily, but because we've seen similar situations play out before. What kind of patterns? I asked, though part of me dreaded the answer. The way two people move together when they've spent significant time in each other's company. Maggie replied gently. The small courtesies that develop between people who know each other well. The way they anticipate each other's needs without having to ask. Her words confirmed what I had observed but tried to rationalize away. The easy familiarity between Connor and Brianna had been evident to anyone paying attention, which apparently included my perceptive neighbor who had no reason to lie or mislead me about what she had witnessed. How long do you think something like that would take to develop? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Maggie considered the question with the same thoughtfulness she applied to all serious matters. Depends on how much time they spend together and the circumstances, but that level of comfort, the way they seem to communicate without words, I'd say months rather than weeks. The timeline aligned with Connor's increased work hours and mysterious schedule changes. What I had attributed to professional dedication might have been something else entirely. The late nights, weekend phone calls, and business dinners that required his personal attention could have been opportunities for a relationship to develop and deepen beyond anything appropriate between married colleagues. Maggie, I said slowly, if you suspected something like this was happening to someone you cared about, what would you advise them to do? She reached over and patted my hand with maternal warmth. I'd tell them to trust their instincts but gather information before making any major decision. Sometimes our suspicions are wrong, and sometimes they're absolutely correct. The only way to know for certain is to look for evidence that can't be explained away by wishful thinking. What kind of evidence? The kind that shows patterns over time rather than isolated incidents. Phone records, credit card statements, changes in routine that don't have reasonable explanations. The things that reveal how someone actually spends their time rather than how they claim to spend it. The suggestion felt both logical and slightly terrifying. Investigating my own husband would cross a line in our marriage, transforming me from trusting wife to suspicious detective. But the alternative was continuing to live in willful ignorance while potentially being made a fool of by two people who clearly thought I was too naive to notice their deception. There's something else, dear, Maggie said quietly. My grandson Tyler, he's a lawyer now, handles family law among other things. If you ever need someone to talk to about your options, someone who understands both the legal and emotional complexities of these situations, I could arrange an introduction. The offer was made with characteristic thoughtfulness, providing a resource without pressuring me to use it. Tyler Sinclair had grown up in the neighborhood and visited his grandmother regularly, though I had only met him briefly during holiday gatherings over the years. Knowing that Maggie trusted him enough to suggest his services spoke volumes about both his professional competence and personal integrity. Thank you, I said, meaning it more than she could possibly know. Just knowing that option exists makes me feel less alone in this. You're not alone, Rachel. Whatever you discover, whatever you decide to do about it, you have people who care about you and want to help. After our conversation, I returned home with a new sense of purpose. Maggie's advice about gathering evidence resonated with the practical side of my nature that had built a successful graphic design business through careful attention to detail and thorough preparation. If I was going to investigate my suspicions about Connor and Brianna, I needed to approach it with the same methodical planning I brought to my professional projects. I started with Connor's home office, a converted bedroom that he used for work he brought home and personal financial management. The room was typically organized with the precision he applied to all aspects of his life, important documents filed in labeled folders and electronic devices charged and ready for use. I had always respected his privacy in this space, viewing it as his personal domain rather than shared marital territory. Today, that respect felt naive rather than considerate. Connor's desk contained the usual assortment of work materials, business cards, and client files. But tucked beneath a stack of Henderson account documents, I found a small appointment calendar that I had never seen before. Unlike his primary calendar, which he kept on his phone and shared with me for coordination purposes, this one was handwritten and appeared to track commitments he preferred to keep private. The entries were coded in a way that would be meaningless to anyone else, but patterns emerged as I studied the pages. Initials that could correspond to BH appeared regularly, often followed by restaurant names or times that coincided with Connor's claimed work obligation. Some entries were marked with small symbols that could have been personal shorthand for anything, but their frequency suggested systematic planning rather than random notes. I photographed several pages with my phone before returning the calendar to its exact position beneath the work document. The evidence was circumstantial but troubling, especially when combined with what I had observed at my birthday party. Connor was clearly maintaining a separate schedule of activities that he felt necessary to hide from me, activities that appeared to involve regular contact with someone whose initials matched Brianna Hayes. The next step was reviewing our joint financial accounts, something I had neglected in recent months as Connor had taken increasing responsibility for managing our shared expenses. As a graphic designer, my income varied based on client projects and seasonal demand, while Connor's marketing salary provided steady income with performance bonus. We had agreed early in our marriage that he would handle routine financial management while I focused on growing my creative business. That division of labor now seemed like a dangerous oversight. Logging into our First National Bank account revealed spending patterns that raised immediate questions. Regular charges at restaurants I had never visited, often during lunch hours when Connor claimed to be in client meetings. Purchases at stores in parts of town where neither of us typically shopped. Most concerning were cash withdrawals that seemed excessive for normal daily expenses, suggesting that Connor was conducting activities he preferred not to leave electronic records of. One charge in particular caught my attention: a purchase made 3 weeks earlier at Cartwright & Associates Fine Jewelry, the upscale store downtown where I had admired the delicate bracelet that Brianna had worn to my birthday party. The amount charged was significant enough to suggest something more substantial than a casual gift, and the timing coincided with one of Connor's mysterious late nights at the office. I sat back in my desk chair, staring at the computer screen while the implications settled over me like a cold weight. Connor had not only been spending time with Brianna Hayes behind my back, but he was using our joint financial resources to purchase gifts for her. The betrayal felt both financial and emotional, a violation of trust that went beyond simple infidelity to include calculated deception about how our marriage resources were being used. My phone rang, startling me from my investigation. Nicole's name appeared on the screen, and I answered with relief at hearing from someone I could trust completely. "I've been thinking about last night," she said without preamble. "Are you free for lunch? I have some observations I'd like to share, and I think we should talk somewhere private." We agreed to meet at a small cafe on the other side of Cedar Falls, away from Connor's usual haunts and the professional network that might include Brianna Hayes. The drive gave me time to consider how much to reveal about my morning discoveries and whether Nicole's analytical skills might help me interpret what I had found. The cafe was quiet on Saturday afternoon, with only a few other customers occupying tables far enough away to ensure privacy for sensitive conversation. Nicole had chosen a corner booth that offered good sightlines to the entrance, a habit from her forensic accounting work that involved dealing with potentially hostile situations. "You look terrible," she said bluntly as I slid into the seat across from her. "Please tell me you got some sleep last night." "Not much," I admitted. "Too much to think about." "About Connor and that woman he brought to your party?" I nodded, grateful that Nicole was willing to address the situation directly rather than dancing around uncomfortable topics. Her professional experience had taught her to deal with facts rather than polite fictions, a quality that made her an invaluable friend during crisis situations. "Tell me what you noticed," I said. Nicole pulled out a small notebook, the same kind she used for work investigation. "I've been documenting my observations because something about their behavior felt off from the moment they walked in. Do you want the technical analysis or the personal opinion first?" "Both, but start with technical." "Okay, so from a behavioral standpoint, they displayed multiple indicators of an established intimate relationship: synchronized movement patterns, anticipatory service behaviors, and nonverbal communication that suggested extensive familiarity with each other's preferences and habits." Nicole's clinical language somehow made the situation feel both more real and more manageable. Having someone apply professional analytical skills to my personal crisis provided a sense of objectivity that my emotional responses couldn't achieve alone. "They moved through your party like a couple who had attended many social events together," she continued. Connor positioned himself to include Brianna in conversations rather than introducing her and stepping back, which would be normal behavior for bringing a colleague to a personal event. And she responded to social cues from him rather than from you, even though it was your party. What did you mean by anticipatory service behavior? He refilled her wine glass before she asked, moved her purse when she needed to access something, and guided her away from conversations that seemed to be losing her interest. Those are behaviors that develop over time between people who pay close attention to each other's comfort and preferences. The analysis confirmed everything I had observed but couldn't articulate clearly. Nicole had given me vocabulary for the intuitive discomfort I had felt watching Connor and Brianna interact at my own birthday celebration. Now for the personal opinion, Nicole said, closing her notebook and leaning forward with the intensity she reserved for serious topics. Rachel, I've known you for 15 years and Connor for 8. I've watched you two together through good times and challenging periods, and I've never seen him behave with you the way he behaved with her last night. What do you mean? The attention he paid to her was the kind you give someone when you're still in the early stages of a relationship, when everything they do seems fascinating and you want to make sure they're enjoying themselves. That level of focus and consideration. He used to look at you that way, but it's been years since I've seen him direct that energy toward you. The observation stung because it was accurate. Connor and I had settled into comfortable routine over our 8 years together, the kind of easy familiarity that married couples develop when they no longer feel the need to constantly court each other's attention. What I had interpreted as secure love might have actually been emotional complacency, while Connor was investing his romantic energy elsewhere. There's more, Nicole continued gently. I did some quick online research this morning. Brianna Hayes has been working at Sterling & Associates for exactly 4 months. She was hired in May, which means she's not some long-term colleague who gradually became close to Connor through years of professional collaboration. The timeline made everything worse. 4 months was long enough for a relationship to develop from professional attraction to serious emotional involvement, especially if Connor had been spending the kind of time with Brianna that his secretive schedule suggested. But it also meant that whatever was happening between them had begun relatively recently, which raised questions about whether their relationship had influenced her hiring or whether her arrival at the company had sparked Connor's interest. Nicole, if you were in my situation, what would you do next? She considered the question with the same thoroughness she applied to complex financial investigations. I'd gather more evidence before making any confrontations or decisions. What you observed last night, and what I witnessed, could have innocent explanations, even though that seems unlikely. But if you're going to address this with Connor, you need documentation that can't be dismissed or rationalized away. What kind of documentation? The kind that shows patterns over time and proves deception rather than just suggesting it. Phone records that show communication frequency, credit card statements that reveal hidden activities, possibly even photographic evidence of them together in contexts that can't be explained as work-related. The suggestion felt like crossing into territory I had never imagined occupying. The idea of surveilling my own husband seemed like something from a television drama rather than my actual life. But the alternative was confronting Connor with suspicions he could easily deny, leaving me in the same uncertain position, but with the added disadvantage of having revealed my awareness of the situation. I know it feels uncomfortable, Nicole said, reading my hesitation accurately. But consider this. If Connor is innocent of what we suspect, then gathering evidence will prove that and allow you to address whatever issues in your marriage are making you feel insecure. If he's guilty, then you need to know the full extent of what you're dealing with before deciding how to respond. After lunch with Nicole, I drove home feeling both more informed and more overwhelmed than when the day had started. The house felt different when I entered, as if the familiar spaces had been contaminated by the knowledge of Connor's deception. Every shared possession, every family photo, every piece of furniture we had chosen together seemed to mock the assumption of mutual honesty that had previously defined our relationship. Connor returned from his golf game in high spirits, full of stories about good shots and close calls that would have normally entertained me. Today his cheerful energy felt forced, as if he was working harder than usual to project the image of a contented husband, who had spent his Saturday morning engaged in innocent recreation with male colleagues. "How was your day, beautiful?" he asked, kissing my cheek, while he sorted through the mail I had left on the kitchen counter. "Did you recover from all the party excitement?" "Mostly," I replied, studying his face for any signs that he suspected my growing awareness of his activity. "I spent some time with Maggie Sinclair this morning. She wanted to tell me how much she enjoyed meeting everyone last night. It was a small test, an opportunity for Connor to mention Brianna, or express interest in what our observant neighbor might have thought about the evening's dynamic. Instead, he simply nodded with polite disinterest, as if the opinions of our neighbors were irrelevant to his concerns. "That's nice," he said, his attention already shifting to his phone, which had buzzed with what appeared to be a text message. His face lit up with the kind of smile that suggested good news from someone important to him. Sorry, work thing. Paul wants to schedule a Monday morning meeting about the Henderson presentation. The lie came so easily that I wondered how many others I had accepted without question over the past few months. Paul Garrett would not be scheduling business meetings via text on Saturday evening, and Connor's expression had suggested personal rather than professional pleasure at whatever message he had received. Will Brianna be included in that meeting? I asked casually. Connor glanced up from his phone with what seemed like genuine surprise at the question. I assume so, since she's been working on the project. Why do you ask? Just curious about how team projects work at your level. I don't often collaborate with other people on my design work. Right, the whole freelance thing, Connor said, his tone carrying a subtle dismissiveness that I had never noticed before. Must be nice to have that flexibility. The comment stung more than he probably intended, suggesting that my career choice was somehow less serious or demanding than his corporate position. Connor had always claimed to admire my entrepreneurial independence, but perhaps his support had been more theoretical than genuine. That evening, as we went through our usual Saturday night routine of dinner and television, I found myself cataloging small details that might have significance in light of my new awareness. The way Connor checked his phone more frequently than usual, always angling the screen away from my line of sight. The distant expression that occasionally crossed his face during our conversation, as if his thoughts were somewhere else entirely. The subtle restlessness that suggested he would rather be anywhere but on our living room couch with his wife of 8 years. By the time we went to bed, I had made a decision that would have seemed impossible just 24 hours. I was going to investigate my husband's relationship with Brianna Hayes systematically and thoroughly, using whatever resources were necessary to uncover the truth about what they meant to each other. The woman who had entered Riverside Country Club for her birthday celebration would not have been capable of such calculated deception. But that woman had also believed her marriage was secure and her husband was faithful. Sometimes growth required abandoning comfortable illusions in favor of difficult realities, and sometimes the only way to protect yourself was to become someone you had never planned to be. Monday morning brought an unexpected opportunity when Connor announced he would need to leave town for the Henderson account presentation. Sterling and Associates had scheduled a 3-day client meeting in Chicago, giving their team the chance to present their comprehensive marketing strategy to the restaurant chain's executive board. Connor seemed energized by the prospect, spending extra time preparing his wardrobe and ensuring his presentation materials were perfectly organized. This could be the breakthrough we've been working toward, he explained while packing his travel bag with characteristic precision. If we land Henderson, it'll be the biggest account Sterling has ever secured. Paul's talking about potential promotions for everyone who contributed to the pitch. I watched him fold shirts with military exactness, noting how he packed more clothes than necessary for a 3-day business trip. The selection included weekend casual wear that seemed inappropriate for client presentations, as well as the navy blue suit that made him look particularly handsome and confident. Everything about his preparation suggested someone anticipating important occasions beyond corporate meetings. Will the whole team be traveling together? I asked, maintaining casual interest while studying his reaction. Most of us, yes. Paul wants all hands on deck for this one. Brianna's proven herself invaluable on this project, so she'll definitely be there for the presentation component. The mention of Brianna's name sent a familiar chill through me, though I managed to keep my expression neutral. 3 days in Chicago with the woman I suspected of having an affair with my husband felt like a test of my newfound resolve to uncover the truth rather than live in willful ignorance.
When do you leave? I asked.
This afternoon. The presentation is Wednesday morning, but Paul wants us there early to handle any last-minute preparations and get accustomed to the venue. After Connor departed for the airport, I found myself alone in our house with a mixture of relief and determination. The temporary absence of constant vigilance about my expressions and reactions felt liberating, while the knowledge that Connor and Brianna would be spending 3 days together in another city created urgency about accelerating my investigation. I called Maggie Sinclair around noon, ostensibly to check on her health, but actually hoping for another conversation about my situation. Her wisdom and perspective had proven invaluable during our previous talk, and I sensed she possessed insights about human nature that could help me navigate the complexities of my discovery process. Rachel, dear, perfect timing, Maggie said when she answered. I was just thinking about you and wondering how you were managing things. Connor left for a business trip this morning. 3 days in Chicago for an important client presentation. Ah, Maggie said, her tone suggesting she understood the implications without requiring explicit explanation. That must give you some time to think clearly about your situation. Actually, I was hoping I could take you up on your offer to introduce me to your grandson Tyler. I think I might benefit from some professional advice about my options. Of course, dear. Tyler's in town this week, actually. He often works from my house when he needs quiet space for writing briefs and preparing cases. Would this afternoon be convenient? The timing felt providential. Having access to legal counsel while Connor was out of town would allow me to explore my options without the stress of maintaining normal appearances at home. I agreed to meet Tyler at Maggie's house around 2 o'clock, giving me time to organize the evidence I had gathered and prepare intelligent questions about family law procedure. Tyler Sinclair turned out to be a thoughtful man in his early 30s with the same intelligent blue eyes as his grandmother, and an easy manner that immediately put me at ease. He had converted Maggie's dining room into a temporary office, with legal documents organized in neat stacks and a laptop displaying what appeared to be complex case notes. "Grandmother tells me you're dealing with some challenging personal circumstances," he said after Maggie had served tea and settled into her favorite chair to observe our conversation. "I specialize in family law, so I'm familiar with the kinds of situations that require both legal guidance and emotional support." I appreciated his direct approach, which avoided forcing me to explain my situation from the beginning while making it clear that he understood the sensitive nature of whatever I needed to discuss. With Maggie's encouraging presence and Tyler's professional competence, I felt safe enough to reveal the full extent of my suspicions about Connor's relationship with Brianna Hayes. "The first thing to understand," Tyler said after I had outlined what I had observed and discovered, "is that you're not legally required to have definitive proof of adultery before exploring your options. However, the more documentation you can provide, the better position you'll be in if you decide to pursue divorce proceedings." The word divorce hung in the air between us, making the abstract possibility feel suddenly concrete and immediate. Until Tyler spoke it aloud, I had been thinking in terms of investigation and confrontation rather than the potential end of my marriage. Hearing it discussed as a realistic option forced me to consider whether I was prepared for such a dramatic life change. "What kind of documentation would be most useful?" I asked. "Financial records showing inappropriate use of marital assets, communication records that demonstrate the nature of their relationship, and if possible, photographic evidence that proves intimate contact between them. The goal is establishing a pattern of deception and infidelity that can't be explained away as misunderstandings or coincidences." Tyler's clinical approach helped me think about my situation strategically rather than emotionally. While my heart was breaking over Connor's betrayal, my mind needed to focus on protecting my interests and securing evidence that would give me leverage in whatever confrontations or negotiations lay ahead. "There's another consideration," Tyler continued. "If you're thinking about divorce, it's important to understand how assets would be divided, and what kind of financial support you might be entitled to. Connor's income is significantly higher than yours, and you've been married long enough that spousal support could be a factor." The practical aspects of dissolving a marriage felt overwhelming when combined with the emotional trauma of discovering infidelity. I had built my life around the assumption that Connor and I would grow old together, sharing the comfortable prosperity that his successful career and my growing design business had created. The prospect of starting over financially at 35 felt both terrifying and oddly liberating. "What would you recommend as my next steps?" I asked. "Document everything you can while Connor is out of town," Tyler replied. "Check his home office thoroughly, review all financial accounts, and if possible, try to access his communication record. Also, consider hiring a private investigator to gather evidence while he's in Chicago. If Connor and Brianna are having an affair, 3 days in another city might provide opportunities for documentation that would be difficult to obtain locally." The suggestion of hiring a private investigator felt like crossing into territory I had never imagined occupying. The idea of paying someone to follow and photograph my husband seemed both necessary and deeply sad, a recognition that our marriage had deteriorated to the point where professional surveillance was required to establish basic facts about his fidelity. "I can recommend someone," Tyler continued. "Linda Walsh runs a discreet investigation service that specializes in matrimonial cases. She's experienced with these situations and understands the emotional complexity involved." Maggie, who had been listening quietly throughout our conversation, reached over and squeezed my hand with maternal warmth. "Whatever you decide to do, dear, you don't have to face it alone. Tyler and I will help you through this process, and you have other friends like Nicole who care about your welfare." The offer of continued support meant more than I could express. Facing the potential end of my marriage felt less overwhelming knowing that I had people who would help me navigate both the practical and emotional challenges ahead. After Tyler left for his office, I spent the evening conducting a thorough search of Connor's personal belongings and workspace. Armed with my phone camera and a methodical approach inspired by Nicole's analytical mindset, I documented everything that seemed potentially relevant to establishing the timeline and nature of his relationship with Brianna. Connor's closet revealed several new clothing items I hadn't noticed before, expensive shirts and ties that seemed chosen to enhance his appeal rather than simply meet professional dress requirements. The credit card statements I found in his desk drawer showed purchases at stores I didn't recognize, restaurants in parts of the city where we never dined together, and charges for services like car detailing and personal grooming that suggested someone paying unusual attention to his appearance. Most significantly, I found a second phone hidden in the back of his desk drawer beneath old tax documents. The device was password protected, but it was clearly being used for communications Connor preferred to keep separate from his primary phone. The mere existence of a secret communication device felt like definitive proof that he was conducting relationships he needed to hide from me. I photographed the phone without attempting to access it, understanding that Tyler would need to advise me about the legal implications of trying to unlock someone else's private device. But its existence alone provided powerful evidence that Connor was maintaining relationships that required secrecy, which supported my suspicions about the true nature of his connection with Brianna Hayes. Tuesday morning brought a call from Linda Walsh, the private investigator Tyler had recommended. Her voice carried the competent professionalism of someone who dealt with sensitive situations on a regular basis, and she was able to discuss my concerns without making me feel judged or embarrassed about needing her service. "I can be in Chicago by this evening," she explained after I had outlined Connor's travel schedule and my suspicions about his relationship with Brianna. "Hotel surveillance is one of my specialties, and business trips often provide the best opportunities for documenting extramarital relationships." The cost of her services was significant but manageable given the importance of obtaining clear evidence about Connor's fidelity. If he was innocent of my suspicions, her investigation would provide peace of mind and allow me to address whatever issues in our marriage were creating my insecurity. If he was guilty, her documentation would give me the leverage I needed for whatever decisions lay ahead. "What kind of evidence should I expect if they are involved?" I asked. "Depends on how careful they're being," Linda replied. "Most people engaged in extramarital affairs become careless when they think they're away from potential observation. Hotel entrances and exits, restaurant meetings, shopping together, physical affection in public spaces. The kind of behavior that clearly indicates a relationship beyond professional collaboration." After arranging Linda's services, I spent Tuesday afternoon organizing all the evidence I had gathered into a comprehensive file that told the story of Connor's deception systematically and chronologically. The process felt like creating a legal brief against my own marriage, documenting the deterioration of trust and honesty that had once defined our relationship. Nicole called that evening to check on my progress and offer additional support. Her forensic accounting background had given her insights about financial investigation that complemented Tyler's legal advice and Linda's surveillance expertise. "Have you considered what you want the outcome to be?" Nicole asked during our conversation. "Sometimes when we're focused on gathering evidence, we forget to think about what we hope to accomplish with that information." The question forced me to examine my motivations more carefully. Was I investigating Connor's infidelity because I hoped to save our marriage by addressing whatever problems had led him to seek comfort elsewhere? Or was I gathering ammunition for a divorce because I had already concluded that our relationship was beyond repair? "I think I need to know the full truth before I can decide what I want," I admitted. "If Connor is having an affair, I need to understand how serious it is and whether he's planning to leave me anyway. If I'm going to fight for our marriage, I need to know what I'm fighting against." "That's fair," Nicole replied, "but also consider that once you have definitive proof of infidelity, it becomes very difficult to pretend you don't know. Even if you want to work on the marriage, the knowledge will change everything between you." Her observation highlighted the irreversible nature of the path I had chosen. Once I possessed concrete evidence of Connor's betrayal, I would be forced to confront him and deal with the consequences of his choices. The comfortable denial that had allowed me to ignore warning signs would no longer be possible. Wednesday evening brought the call I had been both anticipating and dreading. Linda Walsh's voice carried the grim satisfaction of someone who had successfully completed an unpleasant but necessary task. "I have the documentation you requested," she said without preamble. "Are you somewhere private where we can discuss what I observed?" I was sitting in my home office, surrounded by the evidence files I had created while Connor was out of town. The irony of receiving confirmation of my husband's infidelity in the same room where he conducted his secret planning was not lost on me. "Yes, I'm alone. What did you find?" "Your husband and Brianna Hayes are definitely having an affair," Linda replied with professional directness. "They're sharing a suite at the Palmer house, registered under her name. I have photographs of them entering and leaving together, dining at romantic restaurants, and displaying physical affection that goes well beyond professional collaboration. The confirmation hit me like a physical blow despite my intellectual preparation for this possibility. Hearing it stated as definitive fact made the betrayal feel immediate and personal in a way that suspicion and investigation had not. Connor was not only cheating on me but doing so with sufficient comfort and confidence to share hotel accommodations with his lover during a business trip. How serious does their relationship appear to be? I asked, though part of me dreaded the answer. Very serious, Linda replied. They behave like an established couple rather than people having a casual affair. They're comfortable with public displays of affection. They coordinate their movements like people who spend significant time together, and they appear to be genuinely enjoying each other's company rather than simply engaging in physical attraction. The description painted a picture of Connor falling in love with someone else while maintaining the facade of his marriage to me. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a physical affair that might be forgiven and overcome. This was emotional infidelity combined with romantic involvement that suggested Connor had essentially replaced me with Brianna in his affections. I'll email you the photographic evidence tonight, Linda continued. The images are clear and unambiguous. If you decide to pursue divorce proceedings, this documentation will strongly support claims of adultery and abandonment. After ending the call with Linda, I sat in the silence of my home office contemplating the wreckage of my marriage and the decisions that lay ahead. The evidence I had gathered over the past few days painted an unmistakable picture of systematic deception and emotional abandonment that could not be explained away or rationalized as misunderstanding. Connor would return from Chicago tomorrow evening, expecting to resume our normal life while secretly planning a future with another woman. The knowledge I now possessed would make it impossible for me to participate in that charade, but confronting him directly would reveal my investigation and potentially give him time to prepare his own defensive strategy. I thought about Tyler's advice regarding documentation and leverage, Nicole's insights about financial protection, and Maggie's wisdom about trusting my instincts even when they led to painful truth. The woman I had been a week ago would have confronted Connor immediately, hoping for explanations that would preserve her marriage and restore her sense of security. But that woman had also been naive enough to believe that love and commitment were sufficient to prevent infidelity, and trusting enough to assume that her husband would honor their vows even when presented with temptation. The woman I was becoming understood that protecting herself required strategic thinking and careful planning rather than emotional reactions and wishful thinking. My phone buzzed with an email notification from Linda Wall. The subject line read, "Documentation as requested," and I knew that opening the attachment would provide photographic proof of Connor's betrayal that would make denial impossible for either of us. The images would transform my suspicions into concrete reality and force me to choose between fighting for a marriage that Connor had already abandoned or accepting the end of the life we had built together. I clicked on the email and began downloading the files that would change everything. The first photograph showed Connor and Brianna walking hand in hand through the lobby of the Palmer house, their body language displaying the comfortable intimacy of established lovers. Connor's expression showed the kind of happiness I hadn't seen him direct toward me in years, while Brianna looked up at him with obvious adoration. Subsequent images documented romantic dinners, intimate conversations over cocktails and physical affection that removed any possibility of innocent explanation. In one particularly devastating photograph, Connor was kissing Brianna on a Chicago street corner with the kind of passion that belonged to new love rather than professional collaboration. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. My husband was deeply involved with another woman, conducting their relationship with the confidence of someone who believed his wife was too trusting or too naive to discover his deception. The Connor I thought I knew and loved had been replaced by someone capable of elaborate lies and calculated betrayal. But looking at the photographs also provided unexpected clarity about my situation and my options. The man in these images was not someone trying to work through marital problems or struggling with momentary temptation. This was someone who had made deliberate choices about where to invest his emotional energy and romantic attention. Someone who had decided that his future lay with Brianna Hayes rather than with me. Understanding that distinction freed me from the burden of trying to save a marriage that Connor had already abandoned emotionally. Instead of fighting for someone who no longer wanted to be fought for, I could focus on protecting my interests and planning for a future that would be built on honesty rather than comfortable illusion. I spent the rest of the evening organizing all my evidence into a comprehensive file that told the complete story of Connor's deception. Financial records, photographs, witness statements, and documentation of his secret activities created an unshakable foundation for whatever legal proceedings might follow. By the time I went to bed, I had transformed from betrayed wife to strategic adversary, prepared to protect myself against someone who had proven capable of sustained deception. Connor would return tomorrow, expecting to resume our normal life while secretly planning his future with Brianna. Instead, he would discover that his wife had become someone entirely different. Someone who understood exactly what he had been doing and was prepared to respond accordingly. The birthday party that had revealed his infidelity had marked the beginning of his downfall, though he wouldn't understand that until it was too late to prevent the consequences of his choices. Thursday morning dawned gray and drizzly, matching my mood as I prepared for Connor's return from Chicago. The evidence folder sat on my desk like a loaded weapon, containing enough documentation to destroy any illusions about the state of our marriage. But instead of confronting him immediately, I had decided to follow Tyler's advice about strategic timing and maximum impact. The plan that had emerged from my conversations with Tyler, Maggie and Nicole required patience and careful orchestration. Rather than giving Connor the opportunity to prepare defenses or craft explanations, I would create a scenario where his deception would be exposed completely, and publicly ensuring that he faced the full consequences of his choices without the ability to manipulate the narrative. Connor called around noon from the airport, his voice filled with the satisfaction of someone who believed his business trip had been entirely successful. Sterling and Associates had apparently impressed the Henderson executives sufficiently to move forward with contract to Connor in line for the promotion and salary increase he had been pursuing for months. The presentation went perfectly, he explained with obvious pride. Paul thinks we'll have signed contracts within 2 weeks. This could change everything for us, Rachel. The bonus alone will cover that vacation to Europe we've been talking about. The casual reference to our shared future felt like salt in an open wound, knowing that Connor was making plans with me while conducting a serious relationship with someone else. His ability to compartmentalize his deception was almost impressive in its thoroughness, suggesting months of practice at maintaining separate emotional lives. That's wonderful news, I managed, injecting appropriate enthusiasm into my voice. I'm proud of how hard you've worked on this account. We should celebrate tonight, Connor continued. Maybe that new steakhouse downtown that everyone's been talking about. I'll make reservations for 7:30. The suggestion felt surreal given what I knew about how he had spent the previous 3 days, but I agreed to the dinner plans while privately planning how to use the evening for my own purpose. If Connor wanted to celebrate his professional success, I would ensure that the celebration became memorable for entirely different reasons. After ending the call, I contacted Diana Foster, the party planner who had organized my birthday celebration. Despite the painful associations with that evening, Diana's professionalism and discretion made her the ideal person to help arrange what I had begun thinking of as Connor's farewell dinner. I need to plan an intimate dinner for tonight, I explained. Something that looks romantic and celebratory but can accommodate some additional guests who might arrive unexpectedly. Diana was accustomed to handling unusual requests from clients, and she agreed to make reservations at Meridian, the upscale restaurant Connor had mentioned, while also ensuring that certain modifications could be made to our seating arrangement if necessary. Her questions were tactful but thorough, and I sensed she understood that this dinner would serve purposes beyond simple celebration. My next call was to Nicole, whose analytical skills and loyal friendship had become indispensable during the past week. She had taken personal time off from her forensic accounting job to provide support during what she accurately recognized as a crisis that would determine the trajectory of my entire future. Are you sure you want to do this tonight? She asked after I outlined my plan. Once you confront Connor publicly, there's no going back to the way things were. There's already no going back, I replied. The question is whether I let him continue controlling the narrative or whether I take charge of the situation myself. Nicole agreed to play her assigned role in the evening's events, though I could hear concern in her voice about the emotional toll that such a dramatic confrontation might take. Her forensic work had shown her how quickly personal situations could escalate beyond anyone's control once accusations and evidence entered the equation. Tyler Sinclair proved equally willing to participate in the plan, though he offered careful legal advice about ensuring that my actions remained within appropriate boundaries. As someone who specialized in family law, he understood the importance of maintaining credibility and avoiding any behavior that could be used against me in future proceedings. Remember that everything you do tonight could potentially be scrutinized in court, he warned. Stay calm, stick to facts, and don't let emotion drive you to say or do anything that might undermine your position later. Maggie Sinclair offered the most surprising support of all, revealing a strategic mind that I had never fully appreciated during our neighborly conversations about gardening and community events. Her decades of observing human nature had given her insights about timing and psychology that proved invaluable for planning Connor's exposure. Men like Connor hate being caught off guard more than almost anything else, she observed during our afternoon conversation. They're accustomed to controlling situations through charm and explanation, so removing their ability to prepare responses forces them to reveal their true character. The afternoon passed slowly as I prepared for an evening that would end my marriage while simultaneously beginning whatever came next. The clothes I chose were carefully selected to project confidence and strength rather than the vulnerability that Connor might expect from a confrontation about infidelity. The evidence folder was organized for maximum impact, with photographs arranged to tell the story of his deception chronologically and undeniably. Connor arrived home at 6 o'clock, greeting me with the kind of enthusiastic affection that would have thrilled me a week earlier but now felt like part of his elaborate performance. He had brought flowers from the hotel gift shop, an expensive arrangement that demonstrated thoughtfulness while requiring minimal effort or personal investment. "You look beautiful," he said, kissing me with what seemed like genuine warmth. "I missed you while I was gone." The lie rolled off his tongue so smoothly that I marveled at his ability to maintain the fiction of our marriage while simultaneously conducting an intense relationship with another woman. Connor had clearly perfected the art of emotional compartmentalization, allowing him to express affection for me without experiencing any apparent conflict about his betrayal. During the drive to Meridian, Connor entertained me with stories from the Chicago trip that were carefully edited to exclude any mention of Brianna Hayes or the activities that Linda Walsh had documented so thoroughly. His version of events focused exclusively on business meetings, client entertainment, and professional networking, creating a completely fictional narrative that bore no resemblance to the romantic getaway that had actually occurred. Paul mentioned that the whole team performed exceptionally well, Connor said as we approached the restaurant. Everyone contributed something valuable to landing this account, including Brianna Hayes, I asked, testing his reaction to her name. "Oh, absolutely," Connor replied without hesitation. "She's really proven herself on this project. Smart, dedicated, great instincts about client relations. I think she has a bright future at Sterling & Associates." The praise he lavished on Brianna's professional qualities felt particularly insulting given what I knew about their personal relationship. Connor was describing his lover in terms that suggested purely professional admiration, demonstrating either remarkable self-control or complete contempt for my intelligence. Meridian was exactly the kind of restaurant that Connor favored for important occasions, with sophisticated ambiance and impeccable service that made every meal feel like a celebration. Diana Foster had worked her usual magic with the reservations, securing us a prominent table that would provide optimal visibility for the evening's planned revelation. Connor ordered champagne to toast his professional success, raising his glass with the satisfaction of someone who believed he had successfully managed multiple complex situations without anyone discovering his deception. The irony of celebrating his business achievement while sitting across from a wife who had spent the week documenting his infidelity was almost overwhelming. "To new beginnings," he said, clinking his glass against mine with obvious pleasure. "To truth," I replied, meeting his eyes with a steadiness that made him pause momentarily. Something in my expression must have registered as unusual, because Connor's celebratory mood shifted slightly toward wariness. But before he could analyze my behavior too carefully, Diana Foster appeared at our table with the kind of professional smile that suggested important news. "Mrs. Thompson, I hope you don't mind the interruption," she said smoothly. "But I have some friends of yours here tonight who wanted to say hello when they saw you." Connor turned in his chair to see Nicole Rodriguez approaching our table, followed by Tyler Sinclair and an older woman I recognized as Linda Walsh. The private investigator carried herself with quiet confidence, her appearance professional but unremarkable in a way that would have made her perfect for surveillance work. "What a lovely surprise," I said, rising to greet them with apparent spontaneity. "Connor, you remember Nicole, of course. And this is Tyler Sinclair, Maggie's grandson, and his colleague Linda Walsh." Connor stood politely, though I could see confusion beginning to replace his earlier comfort. The appearance of multiple people at our supposedly intimate celebration dinner was clearly unexpected, and his practiced social skills were struggling to adapt to the situation. "Please join us," I continued, gesturing to the additional chairs that Diana had quietly arranged around our table. Connor was just telling me about his successful business trip to Chicago. As everyone settled around the expanded table, I watched Connor's face carefully for signs that he recognized Linda Walsh or suspected the true purpose of this gathering. His expression showed polite uncertainty rather than alarm, suggesting that he had no idea his activities in Chicago had been under professional observation. "Chicago is a wonderful city for business travel," Linda commented casually. "I was there myself this week on a work assignment." The Palmer house is particularly lovely this time of year. Connor's champagne glass froze halfway to his lips, and I saw the first flicker of genuine concern cross his features. The mention of his hotel was specific enough to suggest coincidence was unlikely, but not explicit enough to constitute direct accusation. Small world, Connor managed, his voice maintaining casual tone despite the tension I could see building in his shoulder. Indeed, Linda replied with professional neutrality. I often find that business travel reveals interesting things about people's true priorities and relationships. Tyler leaned forward slightly, his legal training evident in the careful way he observed Connor's reactions to each subtle revelation. As someone experienced with confronting people about uncomfortable truths, he understood the importance of allowing tension to build gradually, rather than rushing to dramatic accusations. Connor, how was your team's performance during the presentation? Tyler asked with apparent genuine interest. Rachel mentioned that several colleagues made important contributions to landing this account. Everyone worked hard, Connor replied, his responses becoming noticeably more guarded, as he sensed something unusual about the conversation's direction. Including Brianna Hayes, I added helpfully. Connor's been praising her professionalism and dedication all evening. Nicole smiled with the kind of sharp intelligence that had made her successful in forensic accounting. Brianna sounds like a valuable team member. It must be rewarding to work so closely with someone who shares your professional passion. The word closely hung in the air with unmistakable implication, and Connor's discomfort became visible enough that other diners might have noticed his growing agitation. His usual confidence was evaporating as he realized that this was not a chance encounter but a carefully orchestrated confrontation. I think there might be some misunderstanding here, Connor said slowly, his voice carrying the careful control of someone trying to manage a crisis situation. Oh, I don't think there's any misunderstanding at all, I replied, reaching for the evidence folder I had placed discreetly beside my chair. In fact, I think we all understand the situation quite clearly. I placed the folder on the table between us, its contents representing hours of investigation and documentation that had transformed my suspicions into undeniable proof of Connor's betrayal. The weight of evidence inside felt both substantial and symbolic, representing the end of one life and the beginning of another. Connor, I know about your relationship with Brianna Hayes, I said quietly, my voice carrying across the table with perfect clarity. I know about the hidden phone, the secret calendar, the money you've been spending on gifts for her, and the romantic getaway you just shared in Chicago while telling me it was a business trip. Connor's face drained of color as the implications of my words registered fully. His eyes darted around the table, taking in the faces of people who were clearly allies in my discovery process rather than accidental dinner companions. The trap that had been set with such careful planning was closing around him with devastating effectiveness. Rachel, let me explain, he began, but I held up my hand to stop him. I'm not interested in explanations or excuses, I replied. I'm interested in ensuring that everyone understands exactly what kind of man you are and what you've been doing while pretending to be a devoted husband. I opened the evidence folder and removed the photographs that Linda Walsh had taken in Chicago, placing them on the table where Connor could see his own face looking back at him from images that documented his infidelity beyond any possibility of denial. The pictures showed him with Brianna in contexts that made their intimate relationship unmistakable, capturing moments of affection and connection that belonged to genuine lovers rather than professional colleagues. Connor stared at the photographs with the expression of someone watching his carefully constructed world collapse in real time. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable, eliminating any possibility of explanation or rationalization that might have preserved his dignity or our marriage. These were taken during your business trip, I continued, my voice steady despite the emotional magnitude of the moment. While you were telling me about client meetings and professional networking, you were actually sharing a hotel suite with your lover and conducting the kind of romantic relationship that you promised would belong exclusively to me when we exchanged wedding vows 8 years ago. The restaurant around us had grown quiet as nearby diners sensed the dramatic tension at our table, though the specific details of our conversation remained private. Connor's professional reputation and personal dignity were being systematically dismantled in exactly the kind of public setting where his charm and persuasive abilities had always served him best. I want you to look at these photographs carefully, I said, spreading more images across the table's surface, because this is who you really are when you think no one is watching. This is the man who took our joint savings to buy jewelry for another woman while telling me we needed to be more careful with our expenses. This is the husband who spent months lying to my face while conducting an affair that makes a mockery of everything we built together. Connor's attempts to speak were drowned out by the weight of evidence that continued to emerge from the folder. Financial records showing suspicious expenditures, copies of his secret calendar with coded references to meetings with Brianna, and documentation of a pattern of deception that had been ongoing for months rather than representing a momentary lapse in judgment. The most insulting part, I continued, my voice gaining strength as I spoke truths that had been building inside me for days, is that you brought her to my birthday party and expected me to smile and welcome the woman you've been sleeping with while spending money that belonged to both of us on gifts that should have been mine. Tyler leaned forward slightly, his legal instincts recognizing the moment when all evidence had been presented and the time for consequences had arrived. Connor, you should understand that Rachel has documented extensive financial misconduct in addition to adultery. The use of marital assets for an extramarital relationship creates significant legal exposure beyond simple divorce proceedings. The mention of legal consequences seemed to penetrate Connor's shock more effectively than emotional accusation. His business-trained mind immediately grasped the implications of having his professional and personal reputations destroyed simultaneously, especially when his recent promotion depended on maintaining credibility with clients and colleagues. This doesn't have to become a huge mess, Connor said desperately, his voice carrying the pleading tone of someone finally understanding the magnitude of his situation. We can work this out privately, just between us. Actually, we can't, I replied with calm finality, because you've already made your choice about who you want to be with and it isn't me. The only question now is whether you face the consequences of that choice with whatever dignity you have left, or whether you make things even worse by continuing to lie and manipulate. I stood up from the table, leaving the evidence folder and photographs for Connor to contemplate while our audience of carefully chosen witnesses observed his complete humiliation. The woman who had entered this restaurant as his wife was leaving as someone entirely different, someone who understood her own worth and refused to accept treatment that fell short of what she deserved. The house will be empty when you get home tonight, I said as my final statement. I've already moved my belongings to a place where you can't find me. My lawyer will be in touch about divorce proceedings and the return of marital assets that you've misappropriated for your affair. Connor remained seated at the table, surrounded by photographic evidence of his betrayal and the witnesses who had helped orchestrate his downfall. The confident executive who had entered Meridian to celebrate his professional success was being left behind as a man whose personal and professional life lay in ruins, destroyed by his own choices and the wife who had finally seen him clearly. As I walked toward the restaurant's exit, I felt the weight of 8 years falling away from my shoulders, replaced by the lightness that comes from finally telling the truth about an unbearable situation. The birthday party that had revealed Connor's infidelity had indeed marked a new beginning, though not the kind he had anticipated when he raised his glass to toast our future together. 6 months later, I stood in the sunny kitchen of my new apartment overlooking Cedar Falls Historic District, reading the final divorce decree that had arrived in the morning mail. The legal language was clinical and precise, dissolving 8 years of marriage into a series of financial settlements and asset divisions that bore no resemblance to the emotional journey that had brought me to this moment. The apartment was everything my life with Connor had not been, honest and uncomplicated, with large windows that filled every room with natural light and a layout that reflected my personal taste rather than compromise with someone else's preference. I had chosen each piece of furniture carefully, building a home that belonged entirely to me and reflected the woman I had become rather than who I had been. My graphic design business had flourished during the months of legal proceedings, as if removing the stress of maintaining a fraudulent marriage had freed creative energy I hadn't realized was being suppressed. New clients had appeared through referrals and word of mouth, drawn to work that reflected genuine passion rather than professional obligation. The financial independence I had achieved felt more satisfying than any security I had derived from Connor's corporate salary. Nicole arrived for our weekly lunch date, carrying flowers from the farmer's market and wearing the satisfied expression of someone who had successfully guided a friend through a major life transition. Her forensic accounting skills had proven invaluable during the divorce negotiations, helping Tyler Sinclair establish the full extent of Connor's financial misconduct and ensuring that I received appropriate compensation for his misuse of marital assets. Any word from the infamous Mr. Blake? She asked while arranging the sunflowers in one of my new vases. His lawyer called Tyler yesterday about the final property transfer, I replied, consulting the notes I had taken during our phone conversation. Apparently Connor is eager to complete the paperwork so he can move forward with his new life. The irony was not lost on either of us that Connor was now desperate to finalize the divorce that I had initiated, having discovered that his relationship with Brianna Hayes had not survived the public exposure of their affair. According to mutual acquaintances at Sterling and Associates, Brianna had been appalled to learn that Connor was still married when their relationship began, and had ended their involvement immediately after the confrontation at Meridian Restaurant. Karma has an interesting sense of timing, Nicole observed with the satisfaction of someone who had witnessed justice prevail after months of careful planning. Connor's professional life had suffered consequences that extended far beyond personal embarrassment. Paul Garrett had been forced to address the situation when details of the affair became known within the company, resulting in Connor's removal from the Henderson account and a demotion that effectively ended his prospects for advancement at Sterling & Associates. The promotion and salary increase he had anticipated were replaced by professional probation and the kind of reputation damage that follows men who conduct affairs with junior colleagues. The doorbell interrupted our conversation, and I opened it to find Maggie Sinclair standing on my threshold with a covered casserole dish and the warm smile that had provided comfort during the darkest period of my marriage's dissolution. Despite her age and health challenges, she had insisted on visiting my new apartment to ensure that I was settling well into my independent life. "I brought your favorite," she announced, revealing homemade lasagna that filled my kitchen with the aroma of comfort food prepared with genuine care. "And I have news about the house on Maple Ridge Drive." During the divorce proceedings, Connor had been forced to sell our former home to provide my share of the equity, a process that had taken several months due to the competitive real estate market in Westbrook Heights. The house that had once represented our shared future now existed only in memory, replaced by financial assets that would fund my new beginning. "The new owners seem lovely," Maggie continued as we settled in my living room with coffee and slices of her excellent lasagna. "A young couple with twin toddlers who are delighted to have so much space for their children to play safely." I felt genuine happiness at the thought of a loving family occupying the space where Connor and I had once planned to build our lives together. The house had been contaminated by deception and betrayal, but new residents could fill it with the authentic joy that had been missing during my final years there. "Tyler mentioned that you've been thinking about expanding your business," Maggie said, settling into my most comfortable chair with the ease of someone who had become like family during the months of legal complication. The expansion plans had been developing gradually as my client base grew and my confidence in my abilities increased. Several local businesses had approached me about comprehensive branding projects that would require additional staff and larger workspace, opportunities that would have been impossible to pursue while managing the emotional drain of a failing marriage. "I'm considering renting studio space downtown," I explained, showing her the preliminary sketches I had been developing for Thompson Creative Studios' new location, somewhere with room for collaboration and client meetings, maybe even space for workshops and community events. The vision represented everything I had been unable to pursue while prioritizing Connor's career and our joint financial goals. Building something entirely my own felt both terrifying and exhilarating, a chance to discover what I could accomplish when my energy wasn't divided between professional ambitions and personal compromise. Tyler Sinclair arrived later that afternoon to deliver the final legal documents and provide closure to the professional relationship that had begun during the crisis of discovering Connor's infidelity. His guidance had been instrumental in navigating the complex emotional and legal terrain of divorce, ensuring that my interests were protected while helping me understand my rights and options. "The settlement is officially complete," he announced, placing a folder of documents on my dining table with the satisfaction of someone who had successfully concluded a challenging case. "Connor has transferred all required assets, and the court has approved the final decree without any complication." The financial outcome had exceeded my initial expectations, partly due to Tyler's thorough documentation of Connor's misuse of marital funds and partly due to Connor's desire to avoid prolonged litigation that might further damage his already compromised professional reputation. The settlement provided sufficient resources for me to pursue my business expansion while maintaining comfortable independence. "There's one more thing," Tyler added, producing a separate envelope that bore the official seal of Sterling & Associates Market. "This arrived at my office yesterday, addressed to you specifically." Inside was a formal letter of apology from Paul Garrett, acknowledging that Connor's conduct had created an uncomfortable situation for someone who had been a friend to the company through social events and professional networking. The letter also included an offer to provide references for my graphic design business, recognizing that my professional reputation should not suffer due to my former husband's personal failures. "Class act," Nicole commented after reading the letter. "Not every company would take responsibility for their employees' misconduct affecting external relationships." The gesture meant more than Paul Garrett probably realized, representing recognition that I existed as an individual professional rather than simply as Connor's discarded wife. The references he offered would carry significant weight in Cedar Falls' business community, potentially opening doors that might otherwise remain closed due to guilt by association. As evening approached and my friends prepared to leave, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had transformed me from betrayed wife to independent woman building her own future. The birthday party that had revealed Connor's infidelity felt like it had happened to someone else, a naive person who had believed that love and commitment were sufficient to prevent betrayal. The woman I had become understood that trust must be earned and verified, that financial independence was essential for personal security, and that sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is showing their true character clearly enough that you finally see them accurately. Connor's affair had destroyed our marriage but liberated me from a relationship that had been limiting my potential without my conscious awareness. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number, and for a moment I wondered if Connor was attempting some form of contact despite our lawyer's agreements about communication. Instead, the message was from Brianna Hayes, who had apparently obtained my number through mutual connections and wanted to arrange a private conversation. The request surprised me, since Brianna had maintained complete silence during the months of divorce proceedings despite being the catalyst for everything that followed. According to gossip from Sterling and Associates, she had requested a transfer to a different department immediately after learning about Connor's marital status, and had declined to participate in any discussions about the timeline or nature of their relationship. I agreed to meet her at a neutral location, curious about what she felt compelled to say after so many months of absence from the situation she had helped create. The coffee shop she suggested was in a quiet neighborhood far from both our workplaces, ensuring privacy for whatever conversation she hoped to have. Brianna arrived looking younger and more vulnerable than she had at my birthday party, dressed casually and carrying herself with none of the confidence I remembered from that painful evening. Her face showed the kind of stress that comes from being publicly associated with a scandal that damages professional reputation and personal relationships. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," she began, her voice carrying genuine nervousness rather than the smooth social skills she had displayed during our previous encounter. "I know this must be uncomfortable for you." "I'm curious about what you want to discuss," I replied honestly, studying her face for signs of the woman who had seemed so comfortable taking my husband's attention at my own celebration. "I wanted to apologize," Brianna said quietly, "and to explain that I had no idea Connor was married when our relationship began. He told me he was divorced, that the separation had been finalized months before we met, and that he was completely free to pursue a new relationship." The revelation didn't surprise me, knowing Connor's talent for creating convenient fictions that served his immediate purpose. But hearing it confirmed by the woman who had been deceived alongside me created an unexpected sense of shared victimhood rather than the anger I had anticipated feeling during this conversation. "When did you learn the truth?" I asked. "That night at the restaurant when you confronted him with the photographs," Brianna replied, her voice barely audible. "I had never seen wedding pictures or heard him mention a wife in any context. Everything I knew about his personal life came from what he told me, and apparently none of it was accurate." She explained that Connor had maintained the fiction of being divorced throughout their entire relationship, even going so far as to claim that his continued residence in our house was a temporary arrangement while financial matters were settled. The elaborate lies he had constructed to manage his double life were more extensive than I had realized, requiring constant creativity to maintain separate versions of reality for different people. "I ended everything immediately after that evening," Brianna continued, "not just because he had lied to me, but because I realized I had unknowingly participated in destroying someone else's marriage. The guilt has been overwhelming." Looking at her across the small table, I saw someone who had been manipulated as thoroughly as I had been, though her deception had been shorter in duration and different in nature. Connor had used both of us for his own purposes, creating elaborate fictions that served his desires while ignoring the damage his choices would inflict on everyone else involved. "I don't blame you for what happened," I said finally, surprising myself with the sincerity of the statement. "Connor made deliberate choices about how to handle his marriage and his attraction to you. You can't be held responsible for believing lies that were carefully constructed to deceive you." The conversation that followed revealed the extent of Connor's manipulation and dishonesty, as Brianna shared details about their relationship that painted a picture of systematic deception that had victimized both of us in different ways. Her willingness to meet with me and offer genuine apology demonstrated the kind of character that Connor had apparently found attractive but had been unwilling to honor with honesty. As I drove home from our meeting, I reflected on the strange completeness that Brianna's apology had provided to my understanding of the affair that had ended my marriage. Connor had not chosen her over me based on superior qualities or greater compatibility, but had instead created an elaborate fantasy relationship built on lies that were destined to collapse once the truth emerged. The knowledge that both of us had been victims of his deception felt liberating in an unexpected way, removing the personal inadequacy I had struggled with during the early stages of discovering his infidelity. Connor's affair said nothing about my worth as a wife or a woman, and everything about his character as someone capable of sustained dishonesty for personal gratification. That evening, I stood on the balcony of my apartment watching the sunset paint Cedar Falls in shades of gold and amber, contemplating the year that had transformed every aspect of my life. The birthday party that had seemed like such a devastating ending now felt like the beginning of something better, a catalyst that had forced me to discover strength and independence I hadn't known I possessed. Tomorrow would bring new clients, new projects, and continued progress toward the studio expansion that represented my professional future. The woman who had once defined herself as Connor's wife had been replaced by someone whose identity came from her own accomplishments and choices rather than her relationship to someone else. The gift Brianna Hayes had unknowingly given me by crashing my birthday party was the opportunity to see my life clearly enough to change it completely. Sometimes the most devastating betrayals become the foundation for the most empowering transformations, and sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. I raised a glass of wine to toast the woman I had become and the future I was building, grateful for every painful lesson that had led me to this moment of perfect independence and unlimited possibility. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.